Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we generally look at great theories of everything, cosmologies, all-encompassing theories, and try to give you a sense of what they're all about and how to use them in your life to, accentuate your experience, especially in terms of your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, and your formation of a holistic worldview. Today is our 575th video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Dewey B. Larson articulated the essence of the reciprocal system of theory in 1959 when he proposed his two fundamental postulates about how he believed the universe was constructed. The first postulate is the more important, the more original, and that is that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. And the second postulate is just that the universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. So it's kind of like that first postulate is more qualitative and the second is more quantitative. And they go together. Larson put them together and through a process of deduction arrived at a theoretical universe. What Larson's universe would look like if his postulates were correct. And then he compared his theoretical universe with the actual universe or the empirical universe of modern science. For example, Larson wrote a book on chemistry called Basic Properties of Matter, where he looks at many of the basic properties of matter, like the melting point or the compressibility or the specific heat, and arrives at equations for those various properties and compares his results with the standard tables, the scientific tables that have been compiled previously. Larson also derives a version of the periodic table from his postulates from his theoretical universe. That is very, very similar to the periodic table of Mendeleev and modern science. But Larson also has books on physics and chemistry and physics and astronomy. And he also has, his final book is on metaphysics, including psychology, religion, philosophy, biology. And then he also has 2 books on economics. And we're checking out one of those books today that is called The Road to Permanent Prosperity. The other one is called The Road to Full Employment. And we're about to start chapter 23 of that book, The Road to Permanent Prosperity. It's called Boom, Dampeners. And Larson's basic approach is one of a scientist. He recoils against the sociological approach of the economists who attempt to impose their philosophical or political viewpoints on their economic system. And Larson states that, regardless of whether you like it or not, This is how the economic system operates, and you can either be in harmony with it, or you will have an economic system that fails. Just like if you are building a house or something, if it doesn't comply with the laws of physics, it's going to collapse, regardless of how many good intentions you put into it. First, it has to comply with the laws. And then you can start worrying about the ideological stuff. Where Larson, the way Larson attempts to form a road to permanent prosperity is through a judicious regulation of the reservoirs of the economic system, the storage, especially the storage of money, and by regulating that and keeping it to a kind of a minimum, a low amplitude, because the cycle of economics, the economic system gives you a boom and bust cycle. And when you have booms, things are fine or whatever, but with the busts, you can get into depressions and even recessions and depressions. But if you can lower the amplitude of that boom and bust cycle, then you can have an economic system that's humming, that's always, efficient, always working. Larson uses the principles of the universe of motion and it's a dynamic economic system in motion. There's really two forms of motion. One is a circular, and one is a straight line, or a unidirectional motion. And the two reciprocal aspects of this economic system are production and consumption, which result in purchasing power and goods. And Larson arrives at about 17 different principles that he describes as being mathematically exact and not subject to any type of judgment or, wiggle room. These are iron laws. The first iron law of economics for him is work or starve, and it all goes from there. So if you'd like a little bit more, a lot more detail, go back about 7 weeks in the archives and start from chapter 1. And you can move all the way up here to chapter 23. If you don't want to do that, you can just stick around, and we'll get into chapter 23. Larson explains himself pretty well, and you'll probably be able to pick up the pieces. If you'd like more of an explanation of Larson's reciprocal system as a whole, check out any or many of my first 474 videos that I've done on this subject, where I describe the reciprocal system, at least in a little bit of detail, with some description of the consequences and ramifications and the offshoots and the postulates, what exactly are the postulates saying, and some of the history involved and so on. But for now, I'm going to just start up with chapter 23, which is called Boom Dampeners. In some respects, the problems involved in setting up a control over the economic mechanism are similar to those encountered in heating a building. Perhaps when we start to survey the heating problem, we will find that our walls are thin. The doors and windows are loosely fitted, and an undue proportion of our heat escapes through the ceiling. We could still do a reasonably good job of heating if we install a large enough furnace. But under the circumstances, it may very well be desirable to put on some additional side sheeting, weather strip the doors and windows, and invest in some insulation. This will cut down the load on the heating system and will simplify the adjustment of temperature in different parts of the building. Similarly, we could go ahead on the basis of the information as to how the economic system operates that has been set forth in the preceding pages and devise a set of controls that will handle the business cycles just as we find them. And if our program is sound and our control facilities are sufficiently powerful, the results will be satisfactory. But here again, we can simplify our problem quite materially by first taking some steps to plug the worst holes and dampen the cyclical movements to keep them within reasonable limits. This will reduce the task of the control system and will enable the use of milder methods of control than would otherwise be required. It will be important, however, to make certain that the dampeners that are utilized are actually capable of accomplishing the desired results, and that they do not have any detrimental collateral effects on the economic situation. The various measures of this type that have been heretofore proposed or are suggested by the results of the present analysis will now be taken up individually and analyzed from these standpoints. We have found in our analysis that the business cycle is simply an alternation of money inflation and deflation, unemployment being only a conspicuous side effect with no necessary or direct relation to the cycle. It therefore follows that the measures appropriate for the control of the business cycle are not those which deal with employment, but those which deal with money inflation. Proposals aimed at countering inflation have been advanced in great numbers since this problem first became a matter of general concern, but most of them are merely variations of a few basic types of action. These proposals can be grouped into two general classes. In the first class are those which, if each operates as effectively as anticipated by its advocates, will be sufficiently powerful and sufficiently responsive to purposeful manipulation to actually control the cycle. These will be discussed in chapters 24 and 25. The second category, the one to which this chapter is devoted, can be further subdivided into two groups. One, measures which are wholly ineffective, and two, measures which have some anti-inflationary effects, and which therefore serve the purpose of dampening the cyclical fluctuations if they are properly applied, but which do not qualify as controls generally because they do not have any direct and certain connection with the flow of purchasing power. We will begin by considering Group 1, the ineffective measures. Okay, now this first section is called Restraint and Self-Discipline. The call for restraint and self-discipline on the part of individual citizens and economic groups, which comes so frequently from public officials, the jawbone technique, as it is often called, is nothing more than a gesture. If adequate methods of control are put into effect, such self-denying policies are unnecessary. If no controls are applied, all attempts to deal with the cycle by means of restraint, etc., are futile. The two actions that provoke most of the calls for restraint, price increases by business firms and demands for wage increases by labor unions, have no effect on the business cycle. as individual price increases do not change the general price level, and wage increases inflate prices equally at the two ends of the economic mechanism. This section is called increased productivity. Lowering costs by increasing productivity is just as ineffective in counteracting money inflation as blocking price or wage increases. But here again, the economic profession is prevented from recognizing the true situation by reason of their repudiation of Say's law. Without the benefit of this important principle, they are unable to see that any change in production price, whether it be upward or downward, is promptly reflected in market price, and therefore has no effect on the type of inflation that is responsible for the business cycle. Murdahl, for example, contended that, quote, higher capacity utilization following a more rapid growth will tend to lower costs, which should counteract inflationary tendencies, end quote. Of course, higher productivity is a desirable end in itself, and it tends to offset some of the price effects of wage increases. But it has no bearing at all on the type of inflation we are now discussing. It therefore contributes nothing toward the business stabilization that we want to accomplish. This section is called investment control. Proposals which are based on erroneous economic theories are equally futile. Prominent in this category, especially because of its status as one of Keynes's principal conclusions, is the belief that the level of business activity and employment can be manipulated by controlling the volume of investment. The supporters of this proposal have convinced themselves that the level of investment is the key to the business situation. The main topic in the theory of the business cycle, says R.C.O. Matthews, is the explanation of fluctuations in investments, end quote. And one of the suggestions included in the anti-inflation ideas advanced after the 1930s experience was to, quote, reduce the volume of industrial spending for capital goods. The fallacy underlying this line of thought has already been pointed out in detail, and for present purposes it should be sufficient to re-emphasize the fact that all goods are alike, so far as the general operation of the economic mechanism is concerned. Shifting purchases from capital goods to consumer goods or vice versa has no more effect on inflation of the general price level than buying margarine instead of butter. Okay, this section is called Control of the Volume of Money. As might be expected from the widespread adherence to some kind of a quantity theory of money, the idea of controlling money volume as a means of regulating the business cycle has a great deal of support, and this idea is prominent in the background of much of the manipulation that is currently being undertaken by the monetary authorities. In view of the confused and contradictory status of the quantity theory, no one seems to have a very clear picture of just what this manipulation is supposed to accomplish. And the only thing on which practically all of the concerned are agreed is that something better than the present system ought to be devised. Quote, two kinds of suggestions pointing in different directions for reducing the possibility of error in a stabilizing money policy are now current. Stein and Denison, that's a quote, Stein and Denison said in a 1960 report, quote, one would prescribe a rule requiring that the supply of money grow at a steady rate, year in and year out. The other would ask the monetary authorities to base their actions more on their forecast of the future and less on present conditions, end quote. The foggy state of thinking on this subject is demonstrated by the comments that follow the foregoing statement, quote, each of these suggestions has some attraction, but it is not clear that either would yield better results than recent practice. Probably the most one can hope is that the increase of economic knowledge through research and experience will permit improvement of monetary policy, end quote. Whenever the specialists in any branch of knowledge overcome their strong reluctance to admit ignorance and concede that they will have to wait for an increase of knowledge before they can suggest how to improve existing conditions, it is evident that current thought is in a bad state of confusion. In the light of the facts brought out in the preceding pages, the, quote, increase in knowledge achieved by the use of scientific methods, the reason for the confusion is obvious. It is not possible to arrive at any clear idea as to how the business cycle can be controlled by managing the money supply when, in reality, the quantity of money in the system has no effect on the cycle. That is Principle 15. The method of increasing or decreasing the money supply may have an effect, but this is an entirely independent consideration. The actual quantity of money in existence at any particular time is completely irrelevant. This section is called Managed Currency. In addition to the proposals which contemplate manipulating the quantity of money for control purposes, there are others which envision manipulation of the value of the currency. As usual, the advocates of such plans are divided as to what direction the control measures should take, and we find two different groups proposing to reach the same objective by diametrically opposite routes. One group takes the stand that the money values should be made more flexible and subject to more frequent adjustment. The adherents of this school of thought had an opportunity to see their program actually put into operation in the United States. In 1933, largely as a result of advice from Professor G.F. Warren, the administration increased the legal price of gold to $35 per ounce from the long-standing value of $20. I'm sorry, there's an extra line of text here. Anytime this text goes into start talking about money, then all the spaces go away and it becomes really hard to read and it starts repeating itself. I'm not sure why that happens, but anyway, back to the text. The avowed object of the move was to devalue the currency and thereby raise the general price level. By its advocates, it was conceived as the first of a continuous series of adjustments that would stabilize prices by juggling currency values. The president, with his usual buoyant faith in his convictions of the moment, flatly proclaimed it as a permanent policy and the first step toward a managed currency. But As in so many other New Deal experiments, actual results did not conform to the rosy expectations, and the presidential powers of managing the currency have not been exercised since the first attempt. The reason for the failure of this program to accomplish its objectives is not hard to find. So far as the domestic economy is concerned, the goods price level at any particular stage of the business cycle is not determined by the official price of gold, but by the cost of production of goods, which in turn depends mainly on the wage rate per unit of output. If the average wage rate prior to devaluation was $20.67. Originally I said just $20, but apparently $20.67. And the average goods price level was $20.67 standard. Then the devaluation reduced the wage level rate, the wage rate to X dollars, $35 standard. But the goods price level did not remain unchanged, as expected by the Warren Group, as required by the general economic equation. It had to fall to Y dollars to maintain the equilibrium between production price and market price. From the standpoint of the consumers, no change at all had occurred. If everything had remained unchanged in the rest of the world, the net effect would have been a devaluation of the dollar in foreign exchange. But the foreign currencies would then have been grossly undervalued with respect to the true value of the dollar, its buying power. Since the dollar was not overvalued to begin with, this would have created an intolerable trade situation. The foreign governments therefore accommodated themselves to the American action by altering their own gold prices. Within a short time, everything was back where it started, except that the worldwide price of monetary gold was higher, an increase that had no economic significance since, as pointed out in Chapter 15, the price of gold is now arbitrary. The prices of some commodities are determined in the international markets, and during the interim period before the necessary adjustments were completed, there was some increase in the prices of these commodities. The general belief in economic circles was, and still is, that an increase in the price of some goods has a tendency to be communicated to others, and thus exerts an influence toward raising the prices of all goods. It was therefore thought that these price increases in the goods affected by the international markets would cause a rise in the domestic price level, but the rise never materialized. The analysis of the economic system in terms of purchasing power shows that the expected result is impossible. As long as the average wage rate in terms of U.S. currency is not altered, any rise in the price of one commodity must result in a decrease in the average of all other prices, not an increase, inasmuch as a constant wage rate under the short-term condition of unchanged productivity means a constant total money purchasing power. When production volume and total money purchasing power remain constant, average market price, the quotient of these two quantities, also remains constant, and any increases in the prices of individual items must be counterbalanced by corresponding decreases in the prices of other items. The actual experience with devaluation in terms of gold, which was so contrary to what its sponsors expected, was therefore exactly in accord with what the theory outlined in the earlier pages of this work predicts. Okay, this section is called Return to the Gold Standard. There is still a substantial amount of support, particularly among politicians and supply-side economists, for a return to the gold standard. This is just the reverse of what the managed currency advocates want to do. It is a return to a more rigid monetary standard rather than a change to a more flexible one. As brought out in Chapter 15, however, the gold standard has no significance in application to one nation alone, and it is no longer possible for more than one nation to maintain free convertibility at fixed rates. As matters now stand, therefore, the suggestion of a return to the gold standard is only a nostalgic dream. Interesting. Okay, this section is called 100% bank reserves. Another proposal is based on the assumption that bank credit is the cause of economic instability. It proposes to eliminate inflationary bank credit by requiring the banks to maintain 100% reserves against demand deposits at all times. The objective of this plan, says R.P. Kent, quote, is to strip the commercial banks of their power of money creation. With such a plan in effect, the monetary authorities would have direct and complete power to determine what changes in the volume of money should be permitted, for the commercial banks would no longer be able to blow up $1 of reserves into several dollars of deposit money. As explained in Chapter 15, the pyramiding of credit that this plan is intended to prevent is wholly illusory. The reserves can be blown up into demand deposits, to be sure, but this means nothing, as the economic effect of the loans that create the deposits is opposite to that of the deposit, and these effects cancel each other. I think I'm right out of time, so we will start this paragraph again tomorrow when we resume, and we'll move along with this chapter. So thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.